welcome to today's Amicus Attorney edition of Free Training Thursday. I have Senior Training Specialist Darren Juby here with me, and he'll be taking us through precedents. If you have any questions, please put them in the sidebar, and we'll get to them at the end if we have time. Without further ado, I will turn this over to Darren, and he can take you through his presentation.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on your time zone, and welcome to this week's Amicus Next Free Training Thursdays webinar. This week, as Amanda had stated, we're going to be focusing on precedents within Amicus Attorney. And given our time constraints, this will be a high-level overview of how precedents can be utilized within Amicus Attorney. Now, as she had stated, my name is Darren Juby. I'm a Senior Training Specialist here at Amicus Next, and my focus is the Amicus Attorney product line. As always, also as Amanda mentioned, if anyone has any questions during our session today, please do utilize the questions field here in GoToMeeting, and time permitting, we will get to answering them towards the end of our session. And if not, please do include your email address as well, and we'll happily follow up afterwards to provide you with the information that you seek. We have a lot of information to cover in a short time this week, so without further ado, let's begin discussing precedents within Amicus Attorney. So just a brief agenda of the topics that we're going to touch upon in the next 20 to 25 minutes here. We're going to talk about working with precedents. We're going to talk about creating a new precedent from scratch. We'll talk about creating a new precedent based on an existing precedent. We'll talk about how to edit and apply a precedent. We will talk about the ability to predefine task-based billing codes on your precedents, and we'll also talk about using precedent variables. So those are two new features, those last two items that I had mentioned, that came out with some recent updates of Amicus Attorney. So in the last year or so, those features have been added. So we're going to go over those for those of you who are new to precedents. And those of you that are used to using them already, this might be a refresher course, or this may be something that you didn't know was there with the ability to do in the latest version of Amicus Attorney. So with that being said, let's just briefly talk about working with precedents before we begin. So a little bit of a preamble here. Similar types of legal cases often follow similar workflows or procedures. For example, in a real estate purchase, you may always follow certain steps in a certain order. You can save a number of those steps as a precedent. A saved precedent contains a series of appointments and or to-dos that are involved in a transaction. So again, an example would be a real estate purchase or a real estate sale. You can then reuse a saved precedent on your other files. A good time to create a precedent is after you've completed a transaction on a file on which you have built up a list of events that are involved in that transaction. You can review this list in the All Events view of the File Details dialog and decide which appointments and to-dos to include in the precedent. If you're in doubt about including an event, it is best practice to leave it in there. You can always remove it later. In a sense, you could delete it from the precedent itself. Now, precedents may be simple at first, and as you go along, you can build upon them gradually. Amicus Attorney allows you to reuse your work, thus becoming more efficient. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about first creating a new precedent from scratch. So you guys should be seeing my Amicus Attorney office here. So I'm going to navigate to the Files module here on the navigation panel here on the side. So you'll see I've clicked on Files, and from here I'm going to open up one of my files and just show you I've already created some events for the purpose of our session today to kind of speed things along. So I'm going to open up this Pendergast Estate 891 Riverside Drive file here. So you'll see that I just double clicked on that here, and as such the File Details dialog has opened up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to display the events brad. So you'll see that I've clicked on Events there on the left in the control panel of the File Details dialog. And here you'll see a list of some events. I've got a mixture of to-dos, appointments, and some of them are actually linked events. So what we would do if we wanted to create a brand new precedent from scratch, you'll remember in our little preamble there I was mentioning that it's a good idea or a good practice to create that precedent once you've completed something where there was a bunch of steps involved in a transaction, for instance. So this would be a good example. You'll see I have a court date here. I have a prepare for conference to do. I have a report to client to do. I have a pretrial conference to do. And I also have a bill your client to do. And I want you to take note of the nil value for the date there on the bill your client to do. That to do is linked to this one, the report to client. So the way that I've got it linked is once I've marked this particular to-do as being done, that is when this to-do gets scheduled. So that is why we see the nil value there right now. So I'm just going to select all of these events here. You'll see I'm using the Shift key on my keyboard. I could use the Control key and select each one individually, but in this case, I'm going to click on the first item in the list. Holding the Shift key down, I will click on the last item in the list. So you'll see that I've selected all of these events. So now that we've done that, we've selected all the events that we want to include. Let us click on the Precedents button right here, as such, and we're going to select the option to save as a precedent. In doing so, you will see that the first window that comes up is the new precedent dialog here, where it wants me to create the new precedent and give it a profile name. And as well, it wants me to handle assignments from here. So we'll give it a name. We'll just call this, we'll call it webinar test. David is asking about editing or modifying an existing precedent. That's something that we're going to cover as we move along here in the session, David. So please do bear with us, and we will be getting to that here shortly. So you'll see here I'm in the process of creating a new precedent. I'm going to leave this just as is for now, and I will say OK on this. So now I've got the precedent profile dialog appearing on my screen. And as you will see, it's got a spot for the name, and it's taken the name that we gave it. We can give it a description. And we can also add events if we wanted to by clicking the Add button here. But we can also see the events that are in this particular precedent by just going like so. And like you'll see, here is the linking. So there you'll see what I was mentioning earlier. There's that report to client to do, and there is that bill your client to do. And you will see that they are all linked to the master event right here. So the scheduling is all going to be based upon that. And as you can see here, it's telling us that this will be 2 days in advance of the court date, so 2 days in the future of that. The bill your client would be plus 1 day. So once I've marked that as being done, the next day I would have that as being scheduled to do for me. The appointment for pretrial conference is 5 days in the past or before the court date. And the to-do to prepare for conference is 15 days before the court date. So when we set this precedent, we will actually be setting the date for this and as the master event, and all of these other items, the appointments and the to-dos, will be scheduled according to that date there. So we've got our precedent here. We're going to do a save. We can also do a save and use if we wanted to apply the precedent on this file at this time. We're not going to be doing that. We're just going to use the save option now because this is just the workflow of actually creating a precedent from scratch. So I'm going to save that. And you'll see that it closed my precedent profile dialog. So let me go back in there, and I'm just going to say use precedent for the time being. And there is the precedent that we just created. So not that hard. Obviously, if we had more events to go through, then perhaps the precedent would be bigger. But that is the workflow as far as creating a precedent itself. So it's not so much that there's involved with the creation of it, but the events and the linking and so forth, that's where the details come into play a bit. Now, when a file's events are added to a new precedent, some event details are automatically adjusted to accommodate their new purpose. So I do want to just spend a moment to briefly describe to you guys what happens to the events once we've added them to the precedent, as we did here. So the done status, the completion status, file assignments, contact associations, any associated notes, the history on the events, any restrictions, and any client portal sharing settings are all cleared on those events. The linking information is maintained only if we've included all of the events in the chain, and in this case we did. For repeating events, only the master event and the number of occurrences set in your preferences would be included in the list. Any other details that are maintained include elements such as the scheduled time and duration of appointments, the priority of a to-do, any reminder settings or change notification settings, any intelligent assistance settings, so the do button. Let's say that we created an event where the do button is set to generate a document for us using a specific template, then those settings would be maintained. The milestone status and any main notes that are on that particular event. Now, firm member and contact roles on the current file are stored. For example, if the event was originally assigned to one or more firm members who have a paralegal role on the current file, that role is saved for the event. This information may optionally be used when the precedent is applied later to determine assignments. And what I mean by that is if we were to go and apply that precedent to a file and we had multiple firm members on that file, the first firm member in the list that's listed as having a role of paralegal on the file would inherit any appointments that were assigned to the paralegal role previously. Now, David, again, you will remember that I mentioned we're going to be getting to how to edit or modify an existing precedent as we move along. I've got one more thing to touch upon before we get to that section of this training session, and that is creating a new precedent based on an existing precedent. So if we wanted to create a new precedent based on an existing one, we would complete the following steps. So I'm just going to close out of here briefly so that we can go through the workflow together here. So we would open up a file, which we've done here. So we've got the file details dialog open in front of us, and we would display the events Brad view, which we've already done. From there, we would click on the Precedents button. And in this case, instead of saying Save as Precedent, we were going to select the Use Precedent option here. So much like the last time I just went through here to show you the webinar test we just created, we now have the precedent or the Select Precedents profile dialog here in front of us. Now we could select one of these options up here saying only precedents associated with me or all firm precedents, and that list may change. In this case, we've only got these three particular precedents to view and they're all associated with me, so we don't have to worry. Once we've done that, we would select the precedent here in the list of precedent profiles. So in this case, I'll just simply select the webinar test that we just created. And now what we would do is click on the Edit button. So remember here, folks, we're actually selecting the precedent on which we want to base the new one that we're going to create, which we've done. We're going to click the Edit button here now. So up comes the precedent profile for that webinar test. Again, this is what we just created at the beginning of this session. We could review the events on here. We could make any changes to that we wanted to make. We could add some events, whatever the case may be. And then from here, what we're going to do is create a new precedent profile based on this one named. So we'll give this new one a name. We'll just call it Webinar 2 for the sake of giving it a different name here. Again, this is more just to show you guys the workflow. And once we've done so, we're going to click on the Save As button here. And you'll see that what happens is it actually closes this. So you see I don't have the precedent profile open for webinar test anymore, but I now have the precedent profile dialog open for the one we just created, webinar 2. And so again, I could simply look at what I've got here. I could make some edits to this if I so wanted to do so by simply double clicking on the event. If I simply wanted to make a change in some shape or form, I could do so from here. Or if I wanted to remove one of these events, whatever the case may be. Now I can simply click on the Save button to save this precedent, or if I wanted to apply it to the file that I've currently got open, I could click on the Save and Use button. So very much like what we just went through as far as creating a new precedent from scratch, you'll see in this case, we didn't have to select any events. All we did was select the option to use a precedent. We selected the precedent profile we wanted. We clicked on the Edit button, and then we gave it a new name in this field and saved it as that new name. So let me just say Save on here, and you'll see there is the new precedent that we just created as a copy of that one. So that, in a nutshell, is how to create a new precedent based on an existing one. Again, that was a very quick workflow. That didn't involve me editing anything as far as the events go and so forth, but you can see how that would be very easily handled. So I'm just going to cancel out of here for a moment. And so the next thing I want to talk about here is the editing and applying of a precedent. So I'm going to close this particular file because we've already got some events on there. I'm going to open up a different file here. So I'll open up my Costanza versus Vandelay Industries, and let's quickly go to the events, Brad, and you'll see that currently I have nothing on here as far as events go. So to edit an existing precedent, which is what we're going to do first, and then we'll apply it. So to do so, the beginning of the workflow would be just what we did. We open up the file details, and we've navigated to the events, Brad. So now let's click on the Precedents button, and again, we will select Use Precedent. And of course, much like in our previous outings on this already, we've got the Select Precedents dialog here in front of us. So David, this is hopefully going to apply to what you are looking for here. So what we're going to do is we've made our selection up here as to what we wanted to show. Again, we discussed this earlier. I don't have any difference between the all firm precedents and the ones that are associated with me, so I'll leave it on that selection. I'm going to select a precedent from the list, and we'll select Webinar 2, the one we just created as a copy of Webinar Test. So what we can do is we would then click on the Edit button. So from here is where we can make any modifications to this existing precedent. We could change the name of it if we wanted to. So I'll just add that for the sake of doing it. Okay, so I just added to the description. And in this case, let's just take out one of these particular events. You know what, we'll take out the prepare for conference one, just so I can, again, we can go through the workflow of making a modification to this. So let's go here, and I'm going to delete this particular event. Now I could have done so as well by simply selecting it and clicking the remove button here. If I wanted to add an event, I can click here to add. And as you can see, it just created a new to-do there for me. I'm going to just remove that, though. I don't want to do that at this point. I just wanted to demonstrate that workflow. And so we've made a modification to this. And David, to answer your question as well, we can save it by the same name. So I will take that out. So you'll see we've made some modifications to the description. We made some modifications to the events on the actual precedent. So let's just save it. Or we could click on the Save and Use option. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. I'm going to click on the Save and Use option for the simple fact that we want to apply it. So we've made our edits. Again, I could click Save to save those changes, but let's see what happens when I click on Save and Use. So you'll see that I get the Use Precedent dialog coming up here as far as firm member assignments go. Apply the selected precedent to the current file with the following firm member assignments. All to these people, same as original, or same as original based on role on file. I'm going to select that one just so we can see how that works out. Okay, and now we want to select the dates for our precedent. Well, everything is based off of that master or base event, which is the court appointment. So let's select what date our court appointment will fall upon. I would suggest, let's go with, we'll say that it's Thursday, October the 25th. That is our court date. So we've made that selection there with the date selector, and now we're going to click OK. So I'm just going to cancel out of the dialog there. And there you'll see, there's the events that we just added to this file by applying that precedent that we've made the edits to. And if I was to open up the original file on which we created that precedent off of, just so you guys can see the difference in the events, there's the original precedence events. And there's what we're seeing on this file, where we've made some edits to that particular precedent by removing one of the events. So again, a very simple kind of demonstration of what we can do as far as modifying goes. But again, that is basically the workflow that you would employ no matter what type of modification you were thinking of doing, whether it's removing events, adding events, or simply editing them, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to click Save and Close on that, and I'll save and close on this file as well. So the last couple of items that I want to talk about, and we've got about 10 minutes remaining in our presentation here today, so I want to quickly touch upon both of them. The first of them is one of the newer features when it comes to precedents, and that's the predefining of task-based billing codes. So I'm going to briefly touch upon it, and then I'll demonstrate it for you guys. So predefining task-based billing codes with Uniform Task-Based Management System, or UTBMS codes, on your precedent items ensures that the proper task and/or activity codes are always being selected. It also makes it easier to find the corresponding billing code when creating a time entry for that appointment or that to-do. The task or activity codes option is only shown in the event details when an existing precedent is being edited. And something to note, the task and activity codes cannot be predefined when an event is created manually from a task list or the calendar. Predefining your task-based billing codes will provide further clarity over which codes should be used when more than one firm member is working on a file. The task and activity codes are passed to the resulting time entry to ensure that the correct code is being used regardless of which firm member is assigned to the resulting event. To answer your question before we move along, Robert, you could use them for either or, I would think. Precedents could be used for scheduling orders, for example, at the beginning of a litigation case, but they could also be more for individual events as the matter unfolds. So, I mean, in my example, you saw that I had a court appointment, and then I had one for the preparation for the pretrial conference. I had one for the actual pretrial conference. Then I had a to-do after the court date that was basically telling me to report to the client. And then once I marked that report to the client to do as being done, well, then the next day would be scheduled another to do for me, which was to bill the client. So I hope that is a good example of what you were looking for there, and I hope that ties in. But in my estimation, just looking at your question, I would say that it's a yes on both counts, or an either or, depending on how you look at it. No problems, Robert. Thank you. All right, so quickly moving along here, I'm going to just open up a file here. And what I want to do as well is just very quickly, I'm going to reopen this Pendergast 891 Riverside Drive file. And I just want to quickly look at one of the events on here. You'll see that just by me opening the event here, it's already, and this one was applied as part of a precedent, not only used to create it, but part of it as well. You don't see the task or activity codes option here. So let's just quickly close that. And let me just double check this one. You'll note that we do not see it there either. And yet we know we definitely applied this one as part of the precedent because we all just went through that workflow together. So again, I just wanted to demonstrate that as the events go, as far as manually working on the events themselves, you don't see that option. So now, let me just close that one again. And I'm going to go to this test file. And the reason I'm using this file is because we don't have anything on it currently. I'm going to click on the Precedents button. And again, we will select the option to use precedent. Okay, so in this case, we're going to just simply open up one of these two. So I'll open up the first one we had created. So let's select it, Webinar Test. And then we'll click on the Edit button. And up comes the Precedent Profile dialog. So let's expand our events here. So again, you guys will remember when we just looked at those events on the file themselves, nothing looked different. We can all agree upon that. I will take our silence as all being in agreement on this. So let's open up one of these particular events here. Let's say the report to client one. Why not? And I want you guys to take note of this last option here on the left, on the control panel on the event details, task and activity codes. So I'm going to click on that. And you'll see over here on the right, it's populated the right pane with a pre-select task-based billing codes for time entry dialog. And you'll see that I've got two options, one for a task code, one for an activity code. So let's select one of these. So in this case, it doesn't matter what codes I select here. I'm not trying to be very factual based. Again, we're just showing off workflow here. So I'm just going to select one in particular. We'll say Documents File Management. And for the activity code, let's go in here and we'll say that this was Communicate with Client. So you'll see that I've made my selections, and I'm going to click OK on that now. And now I'm going to save that. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that precedent because I want you guys to see what happens when I go to create a time entry off that particular event. So let's pick our dates. This time we'll say that it's the 30th. That is our court date. Okay, so there is our events. We've just applied the precedent. This one in particular, the report to client, is the one that I had edited. And I want you guys to note that this time, look at that, we're seeing a task activity codes option there, and you'll see that those are already selected. So just watch what happens when I do a time entry here. And you'll see I just clicked on the Do Time Entry button, and my activity code was already selected for me, as you can see. And the task-based code would be applied as well. So that was just a brief demonstration of that feature there. So let me cancel on there, and let me just do a quick removal of these guys here, because we're going to do one last demonstration here. Okay, so we've gotten rid of the events on this file. I'm going to keep the same file open because the next thing we're going to talk about here quickly. Oh, and before I do, let me just touch upon this in regards to the predefining of task-based and activity codes on the file, the billing codes. If you're missing a code for whatever reason, so if you attempt to save the event details when only one of the task-based billing codes has been selected, you will get a prompt displaying one of the task-based billing codes is missing. Both the task and activity code must be selected in order to save this event. You would then click OK on that prompt to close it and return to the task activity code pane. At that point, you would either add the missing code or remove the first one to be able to make a save on that particular event. And of course, to view an event with the predefined task-based activity codes, we just did that, so we're good on that front. So the last thing I want to show you guys, and we're going to go a little bit over our 30 minutes here, so I apologize to anyone in that regard on that front, but we're going to briefly touch upon precedent variables here for you guys. Precedents now allow for the use of variables in the event title and the main note fields. This helps us to distinguish between multiple precedents that have identical workflows when there is only slight changes being made to terminology. Using precedent variables reduces the number of precedents that we need to create by allowing us to customize the text whenever a precedent is run. Now, something to note here is there is no limit to the number of variables that can be included in a specific precedent, and a firm member can use the same variables multiple times on different events. So let's go through a quick workflow of adding variables to an existing precedent. So at execution, we're now prompted to fill in the appropriate text in place of variables that can be inserted into the event title and the main note fields on events in our precedents. So let's modify an existing precedent and see how we go about doing that. Now, I've already gone ahead and added some stuff to an existing precedent. So again, to save us a little bit of time, folks, I can demonstrate what we've done here. So I want you guys to take note that I'm selecting the variables workflow. And if we were going to add variables to this, well, we would be editing this existing precedent. So we're still going through the same workflow here. So you'll see this precedent workflow is based upon the court workflow precedent, which we used earlier, but it includes variables. So I want you guys to see those variables. So I'm going to expand the events here and take a look at these. There's my court appointment. So you'll remember that base court appointment that we had in the previous precedents we've taken a look at. I want you to take note that you'll see witness X in two double-angled brackets there, and as well as a variable for case type. So let me just double-click on this particular event to open up the details. So there you're going to see one of the variables right there, witness X in double-angled brackets and case type in double-angled brackets. That's the event title field. Here in the main note, I've also got some variables. Again, there's my witness X variable. There's my case type variable. Now I'm just using these as very simple examples. Variables, just so you guys know, are anything that's enclosed within those two double angle brackets, as you're seeing there. The text is used as default content to ensure smooth assembly. So for example, we can insert witness X into the title and main note fields as I've done here. Once we've done so, we click OK to close the event details and return to the precedent profile dialog. So I'm going to do so, but I just want to show you guys the other events here as well, where I've added those same variables. So there's the report to client. Witness X is in the title here. I don't have anything in the main note on this particular one. Bill my client, I've got witness X there. And I could put here in the main note, and we could even add a new one of our own here. Let's just add webinar, just so you guys can see. All I did was add that one. I've just made it up now. Let's say OK to save that. And now I'm going to click the save option here to save this precedent. So we've made our changes to that. So now I'm going to select the precedent, and I'm going to click OK to apply it. So I want you to note, look what happens here. We've got our variables coming up. And obviously, I made a mistake when I added that second case type one because I didn't put a space in between. So I've now got two different case type variables. But again, you can see how this is going to be done. So this is what happens when we go to apply a precedent that has variables within it. We get a two-step wizard instead of just the date selector. So here on the first pane, we're just going to put, for case type, we'll put video game law. And we'll do this again. I'll just change it up that way. For the webinar, we will put, let's put today's date. And witness X, we will put. Okay, so you'll see I've put some completely random text in here. I'm going to click on the next arrow now. And so here is what we get, what we're used to seeing when we apply a precedent, our date selector. So I'm going to select, we'll have a Halloween court date this time. And I'm going to say OK. So you'll remember, when we saw the events on the precedent originally, they had the variables. We then input what we wanted as the values for those respective variables. So now take a look at the events that it created for us. So here's our court date. You'll note that that's where I had witness X, and that's where I had the case type. And if we look at the main note, again, that was where I had witness X, and that's where I had the case type. So you can see how the variables have been replaced during the process of applying the precedent to the file. And that was all done in basically 3 steps. I selected the precedent. We'll take the editing out of the case here. We'll presume that I had already put the variables in there. But to apply that precedent was 3 steps. I selected it, I applied it, and I completed the 2 screens on the wizard. And of course, you can include as many unique variables as you want in the events that make up your precedent. And you guys just saw that. You're only prompted once when the precedent is run for the variables that are included in multiple places, as identical variables are treated as a single entity during the replacement process. And you can see that here because you'll see that in all of these events, I had the witness X in the title, and you'll see that Cosmo Kramer has been replaced or has replaced that particular variable placeholder in all of these cases. The scroll bar would appear if necessary, if a precedent contained more variables that can be listed on the pane. So on that first pane of the wizard, if we had more variables that could be fit on the screen as it was listed, we would have had a scroll bar there. And of course, the fields are sorted, as you saw, in alphabetical order from A to Z. And if we were running a precedent without any variables, well, you guys have seen that workflow as well. So there is no change as far as that's concerned. We select the dates once we've selected the precedent to apply. We select the applicable dates, and we click OK, and it applies the precedent to our file. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very brief and high-level overview of precedents within Amicus Attorney. If there are any additional questions about what we've discussed and demonstrated today, please do feel free to submit them now, and I'll try to give another moment or two before we have to close things off here. David, to answer your question, no, you can't tie the variable to something else. It has to be just something that you've created on the precedent itself at that time. I mean, it could be tied to it, but not something that would be automatically populated. You would still have to put in that file name on that first pane of the wizard, if you will, when we're applying the precedent, like you saw when we had the screen with all the different variables listed and we had to put in our replacement text. You would still have to do that. Amicus wouldn't be able to automatically pull that information or have you tie it to another field per se. Although that is a fantastic suggestion, and what I would recommend, David, is there is the feedback option that you see here in the file details, as well as up here in the upper right-hand corner of the main Amicus Attorney window next to the help option. That takes you to our feature upvote page. That's a great suggestion for something that we should potentially doing for a future release, and that would be having the precedent variables be able to be tied to actual Amicus fields. I'm not sure from a development perspective how much work would need to go into something like that, but a very valid and great suggestion for the betterment of this product, in my opinion, and just gives it more functionality and more power under the hood, if you will. So, David, I'd highly recommend that you do utilize that feedback option and place that in as a suggestion. And the more upvotes that gets, which I don't think that'll be a hard sell, the more attention that's going to give to the product management team and so forth. Robert, in opening a new injury file, we always follow the same steps for sending out rep letters, liens, and authorizations. I can see how this might really help to automate that process, but one more thing. We have to enter a lot of info into the case information, Brad. Is there a better way to do that? You might. I'm not sure how you guys have everything set up, Robert, so I'm completely guessing here, but it could be something where perhaps you set up some custom fields, for instance, on some custom pages on your files, and perhaps you have all that information that you need to gather in one place, and you've got some document assembly templates, perhaps that utilize those custom fields and pull that information. What you could do is maybe have a to-do as part of a precedent, and the do button would be having it set to do some document assembly, utilizing that particular template where it pulls all that information in for you and generates a document that has that. That could be something that's done. But outside of that, I'm not sure if I'm on the same wavelength as you, but I hope that gives you some food for thought anyways. By all means, that might be something to reach out to our support team and give them a query on that, and they may have some alternative suggestions for you as well. You're quite welcome, Robert. Looking at our time, ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize. I don't think we have any more time for questions at this point, but if you guys do have any additional questions about this presentation today, please do feel free to send us an email, training@abacusnext.com, and we'll be happy to field those questions and get you the information that you seek. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and participating in today's Abacus Next Free Training Thursdays Amicus Attorney Precedent session. Next week, we hope to see you all for our Ask Us Anything session. Please do prepare or forward any questions that you might have prior to that session, and we'll do our best to answer them during next week's session. Again, thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day and week.